In today's video, I'm going to help to solve your biggest drawing challenge. How on earth would I know what that is? It's simple. I did a survey. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle. On this channel, we do all things watercolor, drawing tutorials like this one, even some mixed media, business and motivation for artists too. So please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell icon, you get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video a week here on YouTube with extra content for Patreon subscribers. Now, drawing videos have been incredibly popular on my channel, so I wanted to ask you recently what your biggest challenge was. And so I put up a couple of polls. I put up one here on YouTube. I put the same poll up in my Facebook group. Now, there's a difference between a Facebook survey and one on YouTube, and that's that on Facebook, people can add their own options in. So what I'm going to do now very briefly is I'm going to go through them. So I gave you 4 options to choose from. The people in my Facebook group added 2 more. And we're going to count backwards up to number 1 and look at what your biggest challenges are. Now do forgive me if I look down a little bit. My memory's not good enough to remember all 6 off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to look at a little piece of paper. So at number 6, someone in my Facebook group wrote lack of patience, and several people did agree with them. It wasn't the most popular, it was the least popular one. And the person who actually added that to the poll said they were very proud of the members of my group having a good amount of patience. But that's something that we can struggle with, isn't it? Lack of patience, even to, apply ourselves to drawing or to finish the drawing that we've started. So what was number 5? At number 5 was values. So in other words, tone, getting tonal contrast right and getting, a full range of tones within drawing. That's quite important, isn't it? But it was still only number 5. So now we go on to number 4, which is the first of the ones that I chose. And I chose 4 things that I've seen people, teaching for over 20 years in real life classes. These are things that I've seen people struggle with. So these were the options that I chose. And I was pretty sure, I didn't know the proportion of people that would choose one or the other, but pretty sure that these were the top things that people would struggle with. And at number 4 was lack of confidence. So this is something that can affect us in any type of art or indeed in any endeavour. And a fair amount of people chose lack of confidence as being something they struggle with. And if that is something that you struggle with, do make sure you download my 20 quick drawing tips guide and look at the video that accompanies it. That's the one that I put up last week. I'll link to it at the end of this video. I'll also put both the guide and the video in the description of this video, and that's going to give you some really fast tricks so that you can have the confidence that just some simple changes that anyone can do will help you to draw. And once you've had a few quick wins, then you're going to have more confidence. So at number 3, we have realism. So it occurred to me that people might have trouble getting drawings looking realistic. And this is sort of an intermediate problem. So it's not a problem that sort of beginners wrestle with as much. It's something that you wrestle with once you're sort of quite good at getting things, where they're supposed to be and getting things the right shape. Then you can struggle with realism, and that's more about smaller details. And this was chosen as number 3 of the challenges that people have with drawing. So a lot of people chose number 2. So I almost thought that maybe number 2 might be number 1, but it wasn't. It was number 2. Stay with me here. I know what I mean, even if none of you have figured it out yet. Right, so at number 2, we had perspective. Of course, it's a huge problem, isn't it, getting perspective right? So what I want to say to you is that perspective is just the way that our eyes see things. Now, knowing that you all are, a lot of you are struggling with perspective, I will be making, and I have already made some, but I'll be making more perspective videos on this channel. But what I want to say to you is that if you can just observe and accurately put what you observe onto the paper, easier said than done, I know, but if you can just accurately observe and place these things on the paper correctly, then perspective takes care of itself. You do not need to have to work out perspective. You only have to place things correctly on the paper. Now, that said, some knowledge of perspective is helpful because it's going to help you to place things correctly on the paper. So now we come to number 1. So what was it that most of you chose as being your biggest problem with drawing? And really, having taught people for years, I should have known that this would be number 1. It was scale, layout, and proportion. In other words, just the basic issue of getting things the right size, in the right places, to the right proportions, onto your paper from what you're looking at, whether it's a landscape you're looking at in real life or a still life you're looking at in real life, or whether you're working from a photograph. So in this video, I'm going to talk about scale, layout, and proportion, give you some hints and tips. And whereas a lot of my videos are just talking about working from photographs, This time I'm going to talk to those of you who are working from real life as well, because some of the solutions that you need are going to be different. And frankly, it's much harder when you're working from real life, because not only are you looking out at something that's, pretty much endless, trying to get it into a small area on your paper, you also have the problem of needing to keep still so you fix your point of perspective. We'll talk more about that later in the video. So let's get on with the first thing that I want you to know about this subject, and that's why you find it so difficult. So why is it so flipping hard to get things the right size and the right scale on your paper? And the short answer to this is that your brain is not giving you the right information. Now, our brains interpret what our eyes see, and our eyes see vast amounts of data. Even a small part of the human brain is so much more powerful than the biggest computer that we have on Earth. And so our brains have to take shortcuts. We have to take all of the data that's coming in through our eyes and we have to condense it down to what we actually need to know. Let's think about a table. If you look at a table, what do you actually need to know? It depends what you're doing. Are you walking past it? Then all you need to know is how not to bump into it. Are you going to sit at it? In which case you need to know how to maneuver yourself to sit at the table. What you do not need to know almost ever in normal day-to-day life is what angle the legs are at, what the proportion is, what the vanishing point of the perspective on the table is. These are things that you don't need to know, so your brain just filters them out. And so what we're left with is we're left with making assumptions. Now, various things happen time and time again. Now, all human beings are different, of course, but mostly we see the world in the same way, which means that when I see people making mistakes with scale and layout, they're always making the same mistakes. So a few common ones are that people always draw houses too big. If I give you a landscape, I put a little house in it, I pretty much guarantee you'll draw it too large. And that's because your brain is telling you that this is a very big item. Another thing that all humans do is when they draw a face, they draw the eyes too high in the face. And why is this? Is because when we interact with other human beings, we look at their eyes and their facial features. We don't look at their forehead, probably not a more boring part of the human anatomy, except maybe an elbow. And so in our brains, we almost filter the forehead out. And so we think of the head and we place the eyes up high because in our brains, the eyes are the important bit. You can also make assumptions. For instance, if you have a friend and you consider that he has quite large ears and you try to draw his portrait, you're likely to draw the ears larger than they actually appear at the angle you're looking at him from, because in your brain, you remember him as being the guy who's got quite large ears. Our brains will also do crazy things. They'll flip angles the wrong way around. I can't tell you how many times I walked around an art class and saw people doing an angle that was like this. And when I pointed it out to them, they were like, oh, how on earth did I not see that, Michelle? And the reason is their brain just wasn't bothering to give them the right information. So this is why we need to learn to slow down and to actually ask questions, to check angles, to check proportion, and not rely just on what our brain is telling us. In the rest of this video, I'll be giving you some tools and strategy to achieve this. So the first thing to understand is that you must give layout and proportion absolutely number one importance when you're making a drawing, whether that's going to be a drawing just for, a complete graphite drawing, or whether you're going to take that drawing on to being a painting. Getting the layout right is the number one most important thing. It's why people chose it, isn't it? Because if you get it wrong, it can ruin everything that happens later on. So what I want you to do is to make sure that you're always happy with your layout and your proportion and your scale before you put any details in your drawing, let alone actually putting paint on it. I want you to make sure that you are happy with it. So slow yourselves down. Don't do a light sketch. Think, well, it looks okay. I think it'll be good enough. Maybe it'll improve when I put some paint on it. That old chestnut, let me dismiss that straight away. It will only get worse once you put the paint on it because all the errors are going to show. So this is a simple one. I just want you to give priority to your scale and layout and proportion and make sure you get it 100% correct before you put any fine details on your picture. There's absolutely no point getting one part of a picture drawn and putting beautiful details on it, only to find that it's completely the wrong size and not only be disappointed but heartbroken about all the work you put into getting this one little bit looking so lovely, and now you find it's the wrong size, it's in the wrong place, it's going to go off of the top or the bottom or one side of the other. So from now on, always proportion and scale and layout first. So let's talk next about deciding what actually goes into your picture. Now, you may be working from a photograph, but perhaps you don't want to put all of the elements of that photograph into your picture. And if you happen to be working outside, drawing buildings or a landscape, how on earth do you decide what out of all of that stuff that you can see is going to fit onto your paper? I'm going to point the camera downwards now. I've got a couple of strategies for you. So let's talk about framing a picture, not physically to put it on the wall, but nevertheless, a mount like this can be used to actually give you an idea of what goes in your picture. Now this one's a little bit big. This is the smallest one that I could find in my plans chest. What I would suggest is a mount that's maybe the size of a small paperback or a large postcard. You can get your framers to cut you a little mount like that. And I suggest you have a landscape one and a square one as well to give you some options. Or you can cut one yourself. And then whilst you're out, you can actually hold your little mount up and look through it. And you can slide it around your landscape, just literally holding it up in front of your face with your arm slightly bent. So you want it a good few inches from your face, and then look through it and you can actually select the part of the landscape that you would like to draw. Of course, you need to remember that then, so I would suggest drawing a thumbnail image, and I'm going to show you how to do that later in the video. But having a ready-made frame of some kind, it does not have to be posh, it doesn't have to be white like this. You can just use an old piece of cardboard, cut it yourself with a craft knife, scruffy as you like, as long as it's symmetrical. As I said, I'd have an oblong one that you can use for landscape and turn it around for portrait, and I'd also have a square one like this. This is going to help you decide what goes in your drawing. Now, if you're working from a photograph, I've got something similar, but I've got the mount here and I've actually cut this one up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to place it around the picture. So I've got a photograph here. This is Whitby Abbey in the UK at sunset, as featured in the Dracula book. I've actually got a full tutorial of this one available on Patreon if you want to paint it with me. But what we can do then is we can get our mount and we can just slide it around and decide, you know, what do we want in our picture? Maybe we'd like it sort of more squarish. Perhaps we want the abbey to be quite low set like this. Maybe we want to go across like this and get these extra things in over here. Perhaps we even want it to be portrait. And this is going to give you a real ability to choose how you want your drawing to look. I would suggest once you've made that decision that you find some way of kind of temporarily excluding those other bits. So sometimes what I do is just get a piece of printer paper and lay it down one side, fold it over, put a bit of tape on the back. Nothing that's going to tear your picture, but it can be really helpful just to have that visual reminder of what you've decided to put in your drawing. And a mount like this that's cut in half is a fantastic tool for helping you to decide how you want your picture to look. Now, the next strategy I have for you is to make thumbnail sketches. Now, there's often a misunderstanding about what these actually are. They shouldn't just be kind of a miniature full drawing. They can be really, really simple and quick. They're just for you to make a little sketch and check that you like the layout of your picture. I'm going to show you how to do them in a moment. Now, I have to have full disclosure here. I don't do this myself, but I've always been quite good at visualizing things. So if you're good at visualizing, if for example, you're decorating your house, if you're decorating a room, you find it really easy to visualize what the curtains are going to look like, what the color on the wall is going to look like, and you can see it all in your head. You've got this very good visual layout going on. Then you may not need to do thumbnail sketches. But if you find that it's really hard to visualize how something is going to look, then this is really going to help you. Let me show you how they're done. They're really quick and easy. So let's look at this idea of thumbnail sketches. Now, these can be so simple. They can be done on anything. They can be done with anything. You want to make sure that you've got a pencil that shows up quite a lot, or you can just use a ballpoint pen like this one. It's not about getting some really fancy looking thing. It's just about testing layouts. So you want something that's going to be quite dark. So a soft pencil or a pen. And all you're going to do is you're going to make your shape. So imagine you're, thinking about a landscape and you're sort of thinking about doing it in a landscape proportion. So here you've got your outside box and maybe you have got, a horizon and you're thinking about putting that horizon down low. Perhaps you've got some trees going on, maybe some shrubs over here. Perhaps there's a sun in the sky. You can also use it to test out your values. Do you want something light, mid-tones, darks, and just getting this real simple idea of how things are going to sit. What about testing out another option? So let's look at doing the same view portrait. And you can do this whether you're working from a photograph or from real life. And so now what about going the other way up? And what about having a higher horizon line? And of course that tree that we had is now going to be, much more prominent. And then we've got the sun. And again, we can start looking at values. Do we want to bring in some of those Shrubberies just on the side there to frame it. Now, do you see how simple this is? This is all your thumbnail sketch needs to be. It can be a little bit more detailed than this if you want to go into really sorting out your values and shading things as well, you can do. But the idea of a thumbnail sketch, generally speaking, is not a fully executed miniature version of your finished piece. It's literally a 2-minute sketch to check your layout and see if you're happy with the overall composition. I think either of these would work quite well, but it's going to allow you to choose what you want to see in your finished work of art. At this point, as always, can I ask you please to click the like button, to click that thumbs up button. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube. You can help me do it. YouTube rewards videos with audience interaction, so if you like, share, subscribe, or leave me a comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people. I'm so grateful to all of you who watch me here on YouTube. Now let's talk about something you probably won't be expecting me to talk about, and that's body position. And let's talk first about body position when you're outdoors, or if you're working from real life. For instance, you've got an actual still life set in front of you on the table. Now, it's so important that you sit yourself comfortably and you keep still. If you're outdoors, for example, and you're sitting on a chair and you're drawing your landscape, and then you decide to stand up and use an easel, everything is going to be completely different. Everything is going to look different. It's really important when you're outside. This is one of the reasons we did that framing exercise. It's really important when you're outside that you don't move your body too much and that you also don't move your eyes. I made a mistake once when I was first learning to paint, and I started drawing. I was sat in a garden actually, and I sort of looked at what was ahead of me, and then I looked down, and I looked at, the pots that were down at my feet, and I drew them as I saw them, looking down at them. And the finished painting had this kind of curved perspective. If you start looking all around, you're going to change your perspective viewpoint. So if you're outside, it's really important that you make sure that you're comfortable and that you make sure that you keep still. Of course, there's going to be a slight movement to your body and head, but try not to move around too much. If you get up and have a stroll or a lunch break or something, make sure that you're going back to the same position when you sit down. The same thing applies if you're working from a still life that's in front of you on a table. Be very, very careful that you're not peering around corners to see things. So in other words, if you've got sort of the side of a vase and you can only see a little bit of it, maybe a square vase, you just think, I'll just have a look around and see what that looks like. You're changing the perspective, and you're going to have multiple perspective points within the same picture. So again, keep yourself still. Now, what if you're drawing from a photograph? This is a bit easier because your photograph has a fixed point of perspective. You're not looking at it from your point of perspective, you're looking at it from the photographer's point of perspective, but this can still be tricky. Now, I have always drawn on a completely flat surface, and this is something to do with my initial training and the fact that all of the mediums that I've done have required a flat surface, such as watercolors. Printmaking, you can't do printmaking on an easel, you have to have it flat on a surface. So I've kind of developed this way of looking at things, which means that I find it perfectly easy to draw on a dead flat surface, but not everybody does. A lot of people find it far easier to draw on an easel, and that's because this is the way we naturally look at things, facing up, facing forwards. So if you have trouble drawing on a flat surface, even if you're drawing in order to go onto a watercolor painting, many of you follow this channel for watercolor painting, just because you need to paint on a flat surface, and believe me, you do, it's much easier, doesn't mean you have to draw on a flat surface. So there's nothing to stop you lifting up your board so that it's vertical and drawing your picture and then dropping it down afterwards. Of course, if you've tipped your board upright, make sure that your photograph is on the board and that's vertical too. So really important to make sure that you get your body position right and that you can spend some time in the same position. Now, when we looked at thumbnails, we looked at this idea of having, multiple versions of the same picture, moving things around and getting them how we want them. But if you're a complete beginner, that's not how I advise you to start. If you're a complete beginner and you're working from a photograph, I advise you to start by keeping your drawing exactly the same as the photograph. This is going to enable you to take all sorts of measurements and to transfer things across. However, this is only going to work if your paper is the exact same proportions as your photograph. I'm going to show you an easy method for scaling this up. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I've put it in lots of videos, and though people are always very excited by it, it is something I have done regularly here. So let's just very quickly look at how to scale up a photograph so it's the exact same size as your working area. This is going to enable you to take reference points such as, what's 2/3 of the way up, and know that you'll put it in exactly the right place. And if you are a beginner, this is the best way of getting success. So here's my photograph. I've got a nice photograph of this chap, looks like a policeman or an army chap, doesn't he, on the back of a camel. And I want to scale this up. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this white border off. And by the magic of editing, we'll get rid of that. There we are. Luckily, I keep a guillotine in my studio. What I want to do now is I want to place it in the top left corner. Of course, if you are not right-handed like me, you can do it the other way around. It doesn't make any difference. So I'm placing it in the top corner there. What I want to do is now take a straight line from this corner here out of the bottom corner of my photograph. You can use anything to draw along. Piece of printer paper, anything with a straight edge. I'm using this yardstick here just because I was doing some sewing the other day, and lining that up, making sure that your photograph doesn't move. So the photograph is in the corner of the paper. The ruler is going from one corner to the other of the photograph, and then I'm going to take a diagonal line straight down here. Now what we do then is it will either come out the bottom or it will come out of the side. Now, if it comes out the bottom, you're going to take a right angle across to the other side. The same if it comes out here, you're going to take your right angle across this way. So just because it's to hand, I've got my photograph there of Whitby Abbey, and I'll just grab that so that I've got a right angle. You can use a set square. And we're going to go up like this. So what that tells me is my paper was a little bit less square than the photograph. It was a bit more oblong, and I need to get rid of this part here. I can either cut it off, or I actually like to put a piece of masking tape down the side there. I would have some way of making a strong visual stop, not just draw a line, because it's quite hard for your brain to figure out that this is the area you're working in. So put something down there or cut it off so that you get your new working area. This area here is now the exact same proportions as my photograph. And something else I can do as well, if I don't want it quite this big, I can take a point anywhere along this line and take a right angle up and another to the side. And here I have a smaller version, another area that's the exact same proportions as my photograph. This is going to allow me to transfer everything across without worrying that the image is going to end up stretched or distorted. So we talked about that problem at the beginning of knowing how big a house is in a landscape, or any element really, how to judge what size things are when you're taking something very large and condensing it into a small piece of paper. There are two methods for doing this. I'm going to show you first of all how you do this if you're outdoors, and then I'm going to point the camera downwards and show you how you do this if you're working from a photograph. So if you're outdoors, you are going to have to use the method that you may have seen people do, where they do this. Now, because I've just bought a new phone, I don't currently have a lapel mic, so if I stand too far back, I'm going to lose the audio quality, but I will nevertheless stand back just to show you that if you're doing this, you need to keep your arm straight. So let me just go back and show you this first of all. Okay, so you see what I did there. I held my arm locked out, and this is so important. So where people go wrong with this is they bend their arm. So they do this, and then they're bringing in and bringing out. And if you're thinking to yourself, I don't even know why people do that. Basically what they're doing is they're measuring height and width of things. So they may be measuring, how many times does the house fit into the landscape? Top to bottom, how many times does it fit in? And when you see me do the photograph example, you'll begin to understand this. Even if you are working outside and using your pencil, you're using the pencil to measure relative proportions. So you're measuring how many times the house fits into the landscape, vertically or horizontally, but you can also take it much further than that. Imagine you can see the front and the side of the house. If you look at the width of it, is it, 1/3 side of the house to the width is 2/3 front of the house? This is something you can do with the pencil. And what you do is you want to get your tip of your pencil, you're going to line it up with something, and then you are going to slide your thumb down and line it up with the other side. I'll actually do it. I think I can line up almost here with my picture in the background there. Let's go on the coloured part of the picture. So we would put, and I haven't got my arm straight here because otherwise I'll be off camera, but just imagine my arm is straight here. You put the point on one side and you're going to slide your thumb down, and then you have got your thumb on the other side, and then you are judging the width, and you could compare that to the height. As I said, you need to make sure your arm stays straight. So the way that you would do it close up is this, and then this. And again, you're moving up and down, measuring the width of things and comparing them to the width of other things. Let me now show you how you do this if you're working from a photograph. So let's look at the example of the Abbey here in the picture and knowing how much room it takes up within the picture and where it's placed. So there's lots of things I could do. For example, I could physically measure the distance from here to here, find the center point and find out whereabouts that was. This would help me to place it on the paper. I could use a grid method. Could also just check how big it is in terms of its height. So for example, I can put my pencil here and again pinch the place where this is, measure the height, the tallest part here, compared to what there is in the sky. We can see therefore that when we look at the sky from here to here, the Abbey takes up more than half of it. I could look at the width of the Abbey and see if it fits in again over here. It doesn't. It's wider. And one thing that I tend to do is always go back to the outside edge. So if we think about the outside edge, we've got this edge here. I can find the halfway point. What does that line up with? That immediately gives me a place to put the Abbey in. And before I even look to the Abbey, I'd be looking at the horizon lines. You want to look at the largest things first, the biggest and most important reference points. And on this picture, it's definitely the horizon line. So I'll look at this edge here. How far up is the horizon? Of course, this little wall is slightly above the horizon line, but if we take this as a point that we want to figure out, is it halfway? Well, we can check. Also, I can do this, so I can go here and here. So it's not halfway up, but then it's more than a third, isn't it? Because this doesn't fit in 3 times. So I can find the halfway point of my own sketch paper, and then I can say, well, it's a little below halfway, so I can place that point in. I've got this reference point then, I've got this reference horizon, and then I can be looking at this area here. I can also look at this area here. So from here at the horizon line where the sea is, right down to the bottom here, let's think about the bottom of this patch of water here. How far down does that come? So we're looking back always at the outside edge or at the measurements within the picture, and looking at here, what could I say about the bottom of this water here? It probably takes up about a third of the foreground. So I can look at the area that I've placed for the foreground because I've already got my horizon line in and say, well, this comes a third of the way up. I can then look at how wide it is. Now, because it's a smaller element of the landscape, I would have already plotted where the Abbey is going. So now I can use the Abbey to judge where the water is. So I can look, for example, at an imaginary line that comes down here and see that I've got less of the water this side of the line than I have this side of the line. And again, it's not quite in thirds. I can use the edge of the water to check if I've got the wall in the right place or vice versa. And by dividing this photograph up into sections and by considering how much room the Abbey takes up, how tall it is, and how wide it is, I've almost made an imaginary box because there's a lot to this Abbey. There are loads of different little windows and little bits of wall. And by making an imaginary box on my paper, what I have said is all of this Abbey must fit into that section there. I've decided that it comes no further out than this, it's no bigger than this, and all of it must fit into that space. I could then take that space, for instance, from here to here, and say, where's a physical halfway point and what does that line up with on the Abbey itself? And all of this will keep the Abbey to the right size. It'll keep it small enough in the picture. If I just start drawing it, especially with all these bits down here, it'll just expand, expand, expand and get bigger and bigger. Instead, I want to make specific marks. It is no taller than this. It is no wider than this. This is the box, the imaginary box it fits in. All of it has to go in that area. I'm not going to just let it keep expanding because my brain tells me it's huge. Now, something else that's really important is judging angles within a photograph. So it might be something like the angle of a roof. And that's a really important thing to get right, because if you get that right, you automatically get your perspective right as well, as we spoke about before. But there's another thing that people don't realize about angles, and that is that an angle between one object and another can help you to plot where it is. For instance, if you were drawing me, there might be an angle between the corner of my mouth and the corner of my eye. And that angle remains the same. So if you were drawing my head 4 times larger than it is, God help us all, the angle would remain the same. So if you can get the angle right, that's going to help you to actually get the position right. So you can use angles to check that positions of things are right. If the angle in your picture between 2 objects is different to the angle of the thing that you're looking at, then you have positioned it wrongly. So judging angles is very important. So how do we do this? Again, if you're working outside, you're going to use your pencil and you're going to put your arm straight out and you are going to judge the angle. So let's judge the angle, and we don't need to worry about the slidey bit here. I'm just moving my thumb so it's out of the way, so we can judge the angle of one corner of the picture to the other. Of course, you're only using it by eye. Then you're going to have to try and remember that angle and bring it down to your work. We can also use a pencil if we're working from a photograph. Let me show you how to do that. So here I've got a photograph of a typical English village. This one is not that far from me. Actually, it's a place called Cavendish. A friend of mine lives there. Myself, I'd rather be near somewhere busy with a Starbucks, but I come from London. So there we are. I'm a complete heathen about these things. But I know that villages like this are much admired. There are a lot of angles in this picture. So one of the things I can do is I can place a straight line, which ideally is a long pencil, along one of these angles. It's going to give me a really good idea, and then I can move it across. But one thing that people often get wrong with this is they don't anchor the picture. So there's no point me checking an angle if it, could be anywhere. What you need to do is to line the photograph up with the edge of the piece of drawing paper you're using. Now, it does not matter which edge you line it up with. It's still going to be square. So you could line it up with the top like this. You could line it up with the base. How do you decide? You just go to the nearest place that's close to where you're going to draw the line, but doesn't cover it up. So let's put this up here. And I can look at this angle here, and I can bring it across. Sometimes easier to have a second pencil and almost just sort of plot where the line is going like this. And then assuming that this is where on my paper I was going to draw this building, I've got a pretty good idea of the angle. And remember how I was telling you about how angles can help you to place things. So for instance, let's look at the angle between the top point of this house here and the tower of the church up there. And here's the angle. So if I look at my drawing, if I've already drawn all of this, I look at my drawing and I check the angle between what I've drawn and the church, and it's like this or it's like this, and it does not matter on the size because angles don't change. The angle remains the same no matter how big or how small you're working. If I haven't got the same angle, then I can tell that I've placed one of those things in the wrong place. If, for example, I checked my angle on my drawing and it was more like this, I would know that I had drawn that church too tall. If I bring the angle down to where it's supposed to be, I've got a much better chance of getting it in the right place. So I want to know in the comments, what is your particular biggest drawing challenge? If you come up with some new ones that I haven't thought of, or if enough of you ask for a particular video, I'll make that video for you. Before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. Not only can you download that 20 quick drawing tips PDF that I mentioned earlier, and it's completely free, there are also other PDFs that you can download to help you with watercolor painting. There's even a free watercolor painting course that you can take for no money whatsoever. And you can also find out about my paid drawing course. It's got amazing reviews if you want to take your learning even further and have a completely organized and supported process. Now, I mentioned earlier that the 20 quick tips PDF has an accompanying video. You can watch that video right now.